Thanks very much, Chair, for sharing this session and also giving us the opportunity to give a talk around what we do and what we have done so far. And also many thanks to the previous speakers. I think it was quite enriching. And also greetings to all the people who are attending or watching these sessions from wherever they are. So, right, my name is Timothy Dube. I'm a lecturer at the University of the Western Cape. My talk is focusing on harnessing Earth observation to transform water resource monitoring and management in Africa. So my talk is centered around 6 key issues, mainly the hydrology of Africa in general, and then zooming into the threats that affect our water resources, and also providing an overview of Earth observation application challenges in Africa, and then looking into issues to do with potential funding streams that are available and that have been available, and possible collaborations in that particular space, and then also narrowing down to African space missions to enhance data availability from an Earth observation perspective, and ensuring that these provide opportunities for water resource monitoring and possible applications at various scales. And then I'll talk about issues to do with capacity building and outreach from what we have been doing at the University of Western Cape, and then narrow down to key take-home messages from this particular presentation, and maybe touch base on future research directions from our end. So I tried to broaden my talk to ensure that it covers Africa in general instead of limiting it to South Africa, because water resources do not observe what I can call political or national boundaries. We have shared resources with other countries, and sometimes we get water from other countries beyond South African borders. So my talk essentially focuses on Africa as a whole. So you will realize that Africa, from the map that you can see, is characterized by a huge network of river systems. And these river systems vary from one country to the other, or from one region to the other. And some of these rivers, they are cross-cutting several or multiple countries. And you'll see that majority of these rivers are non-perennial in nature, meaning that they flow at a particular period. And then we have a certain period where we don't have water flowing in these rivers. So we need some kind of an understanding of where is water during what period, and what are the potential threats, be it upstream or downstream. And this can be across countries, or this can be within one particular country. And this is imperative because it helps us to have an appreciation of how much water we abstract from these systems and how much we allocate for potential use, be it from an agriculture perspective, domestic or industrial use. So these water resources, they play a critical role from an ecosystem's biodiversity and societal perspective. But despite their importance, you realize that their spatial distribution is kind of poorly understood, especially considering the vast nature of the African continent. And also there's an element of variability. Some places have water, some places don't have water at a particular period. And to make matters worse, this information is limited from our understanding, which makes management and monitoring to become a bit difficult. And this has hindered the development of sustainable water resource management strategies, be it at national level, local level, or across the region, further conflated by the rising population, especially from sub-Saharan Africa. And this has put more pressure on freshwater systems. And you can see from experiences that we had across South Africa. I remember in 2018, we had a huge talk, or 2018, 2017, there around, where they huge talk about day zero in Cape Town, meaning that we're likely to have no water completely in that particular region of the country. And this is the case in some other places that are not mentioned, but it's a huge threat. So what has made it even more difficult, it has been the lack of a ground-based infrastructure or equipments that can be used to provide information on, for instance, from a river system, the discharge levels across different rivers, how much water is flowing in those systems, and at what point do we run short of water? And also from a rainfall perspective, some countries have got good networks of monitoring instruments that record data about our rainfall patterns, rain rates, and stuff. But some countries, we don't have such kind of data. And in areas where we do have data, in some cases, we also have issues to do with the data quality, which results in a lot of inconsistencies and inaccuracies, making it difficult to kind of have an appreciation or some kind of proper continuous data in situ for water resource monitoring. And also, of late, there is a talk around issues to do with climate change, and people talk about climate change and climate variability, and these issues also have also contributed to water availability crisis as well as water quality deterioration. And in addition to that, we do have also a challenge from a funding perspective to ensure that research around water resources can be done in such a way that we can have a proper understanding of how these resources are, their condition across various scales. And in addition to that, we do also have a lack of coordination among monitoring agencies and key stakeholders. And for instance, in some cases, we have challenges that have to do with the data sharing. And sometimes some organizations, they collect data, but they don't want to share with the researchers so that they can be continuous analysis, data analysis, monitoring and stuff, so that we can have an appreciation of the conditions of these water resource systems. So those are some of the challenges, but also we've got vast networks of areas that are not properly covered by in situ data for proper monitoring. And this makes it very difficult, especially for these unengaged sort of catchments. And this further is worsened by it's worsened by cases in areas where we have got transboundary river basin that are shared among different countries. For instance, the Limpopo transboundary river basin, which is shared between Zimbabwe, South Africa, Mozambique, Botswana, and then we have got other systems across the region that we can imagine, that you can think of. You may find that on the other side, one country has a lot of data about what is happening within the catchment on its side, but on the other countries, there is not such information. Or there is information, but is not shared. So this makes it very difficult. If you look at the map, which is down there, which shows the distribution or network of in situ monitoring stations across the world, you'll realize that Africa is largely blank, especially above South Africa. As you go up to other countries, there is limited network of these systems. And what does that imply? It means there's lack of understanding in terms of how water resources are in most of these countries. And if there is such kind of information, and it is largely at a limited scale. So from an Earth observation perspective, this kind of data brings in new opportunities for water resource management or water resource monitoring and assessment at large scale, or what I can call wall-to-wall monitoring kind of approach. So when you check at literature, you'll realize that there's a lot of Earth observation data that has been harnessed of late for water resource monitoring. And this has somehow closed the gap that we somehow experience from a traditional way of monitoring water resources, which is mainly in situ equipments that are located across various catchments within the region. So Earth observation provides large-scale spatial data with a footprint that covers almost the entire globe. But therefore, in our case, we can be able to extract this data specifically for the African continent to understand how our water resources are doing in terms of its condition on quality and quantity. So you can see from the graph below that there's been an increase in terms of research in that particular case, But the major challenge that we have with the research that has been done using Earth observation, or should I say satellite data, is that much of it has been focusing on small localized areas without giving an appreciation or providing a clear picture of how large catchments are faring. And this information is somehow kind of critical because it's required for decision making, for establishing policies that can be used to enhance water resource monitoring. So from a rainfall, from a rainfall estimation perspective, we've got a huge data set that are available from an Earth observation perspective, from, for instance, tropical rainfall measuring missions, precipitation estimations from the Persian data hubs, and we have also the Climate Prediction Center morphing, which provides also rainfall data. But this data is available at a coarse resolution, which makes it sometimes very difficult to predict accurately rainfall. And also for us to conduct some kind of predictions, accurate predictions of rainfall, we need a lot of in situ data, which can be used to validate or calibrate the models for estimating rainfall. And because of that, in some countries, we do have lots of unengaged catchments, and this has made it very difficult for rainfall predictions, especially to derive accurate estimates. So those are some of the challenges that we have. But therefore, the question is, how can we use AI data to sort of harness all this data and try to downscale it such that we can improve on the estimation accuracies of rainfall across different scales, especially for Africa, because this information is imperative for farmers and even cities or municipalities in terms of planning, in terms of ensuring that which areas are, for instance, at risk of floods and stuff like that. This information is quite critical. And there's one aspect for those who understand the hydrological cycle. You know, we receive a certain amount of rainfall, but then how much is it that remains on the surface, and how much do we lose through runoff, and how much is lost through transpiration? And transpiration is one of the key hydrological components that contributes to water loss from the surface. Hence, most of the dams dry, some of the rivers or open water bodies dry. So we have to quantify the amount of water loss from all these systems. And once we can be able to know how much we lose through transpiration, then we can be able to sort of develop new techniques that can help to minimize water loss, especially considering that we are moving towards a water insecure continent, so to say. So we've got a vast of Earth observation data set that is available at various scales, as you can see from the graph there. Some of it is from the resolution varies between 250 to 2 kilometers, so to say. Although this data is quite coarse, but it is quite imperative for us to use it to kind of have an appreciation of how much water we lose, be it from agriculture, from water bodies, from our key rivers. And of late, we have got a new set of satellites that are emerging, like your Sentinel from the European Space Agency at a resolution of between 10 to 20 meters, which is quite good. So we can use this information by integrating with other data sets that have got thermal information for us to derive accurate estimates in terms of water usage. And also another key aspect, especially from an agriculture perspective, as you are aware now, we're approaching summer, and some farmers in some parts of the country or the regions are now planning to preparing their lands for cultivation. But it's very critical for them to know how much soil moisture is available in their areas. And for those who practice irrigation, they have to know this information, how much soil moisture is there in their farms, so that they can irrigate or not to irrigate. So for proper planning, water allocation, it's very key to have this information. But now we've got a lot of issues to do with the droughts that are emerging across the continent. Farmers, sometimes they farm, and in the end, they lose everything. There's nothing that comes out. The harvest becomes very less and less. So those are some of the critical issues that from an Earth observation perspective, we need artificial intelligence techniques that can integrate all the data sets that are available, including the limited in situ data that is there out there for us to be able to estimate soil moisture variability across the region. So far, if you look at the research, you'll realize that much of it has been done in the Horn of Africa, which includes part of Eritrea, Ethiopia, and partly Kenya. And there's been a lot of research funding that has been allocated to those areas because year in and year out, they are largely hit by droughts. So those are some of the issues that, hence you see too much research has been done in those areas. But when you move down south, in Southern Africa, there is limited research that has been done. Despite that, we have lots and lots of Earth observation spatial data that we can use to develop products that can provide early warning systems to farmers or the policymakers to say this is the likely condition that will be in 2026, for instance. Then they can start preparing. Then also, one key aspect, much of our water resources, especially for our cities or rural areas, we depend on water from surface, should I say surface water that we see when we drive around or move around. But now there is a critical need for us to know how much water is available out there, especially for rural communities that in the areas, if you drive across Africa, you realize that some communities don't have proper water supply. They rely on water from open water bodies from the rivers. But some of this water is available today, tomorrow is not there. And what next after that? So we have to provide critical information from an Earth observation perspective using a wide range of Earth observation data that is out there, map these water resources that are dotted across the continent, and also determine the patterns in terms of water availability as well as water quality. So we have done a lot of research in trying to understand water availability across at national scale or at catchment scale, and understand the variations that are there over time. And this information is critical also for proper planning and even for those who are involved in ranching, for purposes of grazing, they can be able to guide their livestock or even wildlife and even killing, depending on the amount of water that is available. Then there is another thing from an Earth observation perspective. Crop mapping is one of the key areas that we have done a lot of research from UWC perspective in partnership with the Water Research Commission. We're interested in identifying all active farming areas across South Africa, for instance. And you can see from the images below that our models from Earth observation, where we integrate some machine learning techniques and Earth observation data, we're able to pick active agricultural areas. But in addition to that, we're able now to quantify the ones that are rain-fed and the ones that are irrigated. And this is also critical so that we know how much water is allocated or is used for agriculture from an irrigation perspective, but also from a rain-fed perspective. So our study did quite well in terms of hitting the active agricultural areas across the country. And this research integrated vast data sets, try and improve in mapping these croplands. And it's quite interesting to see how much area is under irrigation and how much area is rain-fed. And also from a drought perspective, we did quite a good research with colleagues from a university in Zimbabwe, because it's quite important to understand how droughts affect, should I say, farmers across different regions. So one has to understand the variations in terms of rainfall patterns and its implications in terms of, let's say, from an agroecological perspective, which areas are likely to be affected and which areas seem to be safe. And from a government planning perspective, this is very key, because they can then provide what I can call safety nets for those areas that are largely affected. So we did a large-scale assessment for Zimbabwe on a project that was funded by I think it was World Bank by then. And this is what we saw. We saw that areas that are close to or areas that form part of the Limpopo transboundary basin were largely experiencing much droughts than other areas. And what does this imply to farmers and communities that are found in those areas? And all this required a lot of Earth observation data, or should I say big data and machine learning to handle, because for you to do such kind of national scale data analysis, you require high performing computing systems, a lot of data sets, and a lot of in situ data to validate the models that run for that kind of data. And also another aspect, especially in the Western Cape and other parts in the Eastern Cape and other parts of South Africa, we realize that of late, due to climate change, we have lots of emerging invasive plants. And some of these, I heard somebody talking about algae blooms. We have water hyacinth in some of the dams, but we need some kind of frequent monitoring to determine areas that are affected by these invasive species. So we did conduct a study we do a lot of research actually in the Western Cape, around the Cape Agulhas, where we are trying to map these invasive species. And this kind of work is quite imperative because the government has embarked on a massive clearing of some of these invasive species, but we have to identify where they are and what type of species they are and how much water do they take out of the system, should I say groundwater abstraction, by these plants, so that when they clear, they prioritize them based on the amount of water that they utilize. So if they take too much water, therefore, there must be rapid clearing for those kind of plant species. And we developed this kind of algorithms with some of our PhD and master students to kind of identify areas that are affected by these kind of plants. Then also we have done a lot of work on mapping groundwater dependent vegetation in the greater floristic region in the Western Cape. And the research was quite interesting, and some of it we did in the Kruger National Park, and the results were quite interesting. So from our models, you can see that we were able to map or delineate these plants at an accuracy around 92 or 96, between 92 and 97. And this shows you that with AI, you can be able to work with big data and achieve a certain accuracy in terms of pinpointing where groundwater dependent vegetation are across the catchment. And these also, they tell us a good story about the amount of water that is likely to be available in those areas. So this information is quite critical. And from a conservation perspective, this is quite key because we know now where are our groundwater dependent ecosystem located. And from a conservation perspective, we can then take the next step in terms of conserving them. Then there is another issue that is quite imperative, even here in South Africa. I think illegal mining is quite a problem, a huge problem. And this is a huge problem even across sub-Saharan Africa, so to say. Illegal mining, as you can see from the pictures, massive landscapes are being destroyed because sometimes monitoring becomes very difficult. But from an Earth observation perspective, coupled with AI, we can be able to pinpoint areas where there is active illegal mining, especially if you train the model nicely. And then from a monitoring perspective, I think this provides critical information, especially if it's related to policymakers, to know which areas are kind of experiencing these kind of problems. So you can see what we're able to pick from these satellites and areas that have been affected by illegal mining, and the implications of this kind of work or of this kind of activities on water quality and water availability in general, because illegal mining requires a lot of water resources. So it does affect water quality and water quantity. And in some cases, they use mercury which ends up it downstream in some places, even going into the parks, killing wildlife or even livestock. So these are some of the activities that we are able to pick from an Earth observation perspective and machine learning techniques that we apply on our research. And the other thing is we have applied a lot of Earth observation and wetland research with my PhD students. Some of them have completed, and master students. And this was quite interesting because why wetlands? As the environment becomes drier and drier, people now, especially in rural areas, they shift their agricultural activities towards areas that have wetlands, grazing patterns, crop cultivation in those areas. What does that imply on the conservation of these wetlands? It means they are slowly deteriorating, or they're deteriorating at a faster rate. So we have to know where these wetlands, small wetlands are, especially the ones that are not protected, and what is their condition, so that we can come up with strategies working hand in hand with communities that depends on them to see how we can help, or to see how they can be used in a sustainable manner. And having said that, this kind of research requires a lot of internet activity, internet connectivity, so to say, to access data. And this is a major challenge across many African countries. There is limited data availability in some of those, internet connectivity in some of those. So to process this kind of data becomes a challenge, and hence it makes monitoring a challenge. Also, satellite data or Earth observation, although we have lots and lots of them, on its own, it can't give, and it will be very difficult to tell if information that we get from there is accurate. We have to validate this with in situ data. So we've got limited number of in situ monitoring instruments across our catchments, and this has made it very difficult to sort of monitor this system. Also, in most cases, you require some kind of high-performing computing systems to handle this big data, and even the analytical analysis part of it. And this is the huge challenge. Even here in South Africa, certain universities have all these facilities, but some don't have. And this has made it very difficult to deal with, to use this data to sort of monitor our water resources. And also from a skills perspective, Earth observation data requires unique skill, kind of mathematical appreciation, computing, computer science related kind of skill for one to analyze this kind of data. So this is one of the areas that requires some kind of empowering in terms of capacity building. But more so, if you check on the finding trends across Africa, you'll realize that a few countries fund research. Maybe South Africa, I think, is one of the countries that is doing quite well in that particular space. There are a lot of funding agencies that try to promote scientific research, be it from a water resources or natural resource monitoring perspective. But in other countries, we don't have much being done in that particular space. Therefore, this has made it very difficult to have an appreciation of how our water resources are, and also how Earth observation can be used in terms of monitoring these systems. Lastly, on that aspect, lack of data sharing is one of the key issues, because, like I said, in shared river basins, having data from one country to the other becomes a problem. Issues of security and stuff. I'm not sure how that space can be made open. And from a funding stream, I know I might have been preaching some kind of doom and gloom, but there is kind of hope in terms of funding beyond independent countries. For instance, the AU and the European Union, they've now come together to try and work together and ensure that there is potential funding that is channeled on the use of Earth observation, but also skilling researchers in monitoring these natural resources, and particularly water resources across the continent. So a lot of research is now coming to fruition because of such kind of opportunities. And we also see a lot of new observation centers being established across different countries, which is quite good because this will somehow help to promote collaboration among different countries in trying to monitor and assess these water resources. And I've been able to participate in some of these centers or collaborate with them in some of the researchers. And what they're doing is quite good, although I believe it was going to be good if all these resources were pulled in one place and be used to monitor the continent at large, instead of each country having its own Earth observation, or should I say satellite center, so to say. It won't help because some of the countries are by nature very small. Am I still audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I've left it 2 slides, I think. And therefore, based on that note, from a capacity building perspective, we, as the University of Western Cape, we have done a lot in trying to equip our students with these particular skills on how to handle big data, how to process it using machine learning techniques, be it from an agricultural perspective, water use, be it on monitoring of water resources in general. We have done a lot in that particular space. So you can see from between 2015 and 25, we're able to graduate 116 MSc in that particular field. And then we had about 6 PhDs that were graduated in that particular space. And we had lots of funding from different streams, although I couldn't list them. But I think you can see from the picture there, there's a lot of young girls that we recruit in that particular space that are kind of upcoming new researchers to empower or to capacitate them to occupy this kind of critical research space. So now, what are the take-home messages? What I can say is that Earth observation is one of the emerging research spaces that can sort of help, especially in Africa, where we have got limited financial resources, to have a good network of in-situ monitoring, because therefore we can have timely, for instance, monthly data that is available or across the continent that can be used for water resources monitoring. But it also provides a critical, or should I say, a critical overview of our continent's water resources, which can aid decision-making. And also its use can also facilitate what I can call informed decision-making and targeted intervention, especially where we see some kind of deterioration in terms of water quality, or for instance, land degradation. We can be able to pick such kind of challenges. Also, the availability and accessibility of hydrological data for monitoring and accessing water resources have been partially improved because of the adoption of this data. Then, where to from now? I still believe that there is still a lot of work that has to be done, especially for the future. We have to engage the different countries to ensure that they, or should I say those involved in that particular space, they should engage different countries to fund research that will have a positive bearing for our continent, especially in management of water resources. But also we should promote collaborative research among different institutions and different countries across the region. And also do invest in field equipment to validate this kind of these products that we get from satellite data. And also we need what I can call interdepartmental or institutional synergies, some kind of cross-fertilization where we work together instead of having UWC working on its own, UCT working on its own. Instead of appearing like we're competing for small resources, we must work together, pull resources together, and enhance this kind of research. This is quite imperative. And also invest on high quality postgraduate throughput, because quality is also another aspect. The kind of research that we do should have a bearing, and the candidates that we train, they should be of good quality for them to take this thing further. Lastly, there is a need to invest in digital transformation, particularly in this particular case, ensure that whatever programs that we do, especially from a natural physical science perspective, we bring these artificial intelligence techniques into all our teaching so that we capacitate our students in that particular aspect, because that's where the world is moving. With that, I can say thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm just asking about collaboration. Is there some hope that institutions in South Africa will be working together to form a repository for this data, or across Africa? Is there some hope in that regard?
Yes, thank you very much. There is indeed hope. I think the current research funding streams that are available out there also, I think they are designed in such a way that they promote trans-institutional collaboration. For instance, be it locally or across the continent in general. For instance, the GMS that I spoke about, definitely if you don't have a team of about 6 institutions involved, they won't fund it. So in one or the other, they try to enforce that culture of, for instance, people in researchers in South Africa working with researchers in Botswana, Namibia, building that kind of network. I think it's quite imperative, and there is indeed hope.
Good, thank you. It's good to hear. Let me go to the Q&A. No, this is not. Oh, there we go. Muaz Bamji says, thanks, Prof Dube, for the interesting and extremely relevant talk. I would like your opinion on the increased availability of Earth observation foundation models, pre-trained on such large remote sensing data sets, then fine-tuned for downstream tasks or applications related to climate and sustainability. What is your view on their benefits and pitfalls?
Yes, thanks very much, Moazi. I think definitely they do have their own pitfalls, especially if the resolution of that data set is quite kind of coarse. But I think at a continental scale, definitely they provide critical insights on the state of affairs from a climate perspective or the environment in general or water resources in general. But then when downscaled to a localized scale, definitely there is need for further research where we sort of use high resolution data to sort of compare with what we get from these models and see if there is some kind of correlation or similarity in terms of the quality of the result that we get there. But I think definitely they play a critical role in giving us insight on the state of affairs from an environmental perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. Ronald Rohwashwa asks, are there laws to regulate these observations? And I'm not quite sure what he means, but maybe he's referring to the data that is gathered from these observations. Do you understand what he means?
Yeah, I think after your comment, I think I understand what he means. Earth observation, I think it's available in different types. Remember, there is Earth observation for natural resource monitoring, your rainfall, the ones that we use for weather data or for vegetation assessment, agriculture and stuff. So that kind of data, I think, definitely it's available for free out there. So it means it can be applied and it has no harm, largely because the resolution is quite coarse. But for the other data sets, I think, for instance, those who use drones, you know that in some countries you need clearance to use them for data collecting. So there are laws that are there to regulate high resolution data acquisition equipment. But from a satellite perspective, especially for natural resource monitoring, I do believe there are laws, but they're a bit flexible because the data is used for humanity. Hence, they are provided, for instance, by NASA or by the European Space Agency and other organizations for free.
Okay.
And they help us to monitor our resources, especially given that we have limited ground data that is available that we can use to have an appreciation of how the state of environment is.
Right, thank you. Kumbulani Mpofu asks, what are the alternative economies for farmers in highly drought-prone countries across Africa for sustainable futures?
Yeah, I don't understand the alternative economies, but if it's from an agricultural perspective, I think definitely if you drive around Botswana and the other parts, the southwestern part of Zimbabwe, you'll see that there are lots of farmers that are doing, should I say, sand water abstraction. So you'll find that in some of these places, they construct some kind of what do you call them, structures along rivers to capture sand, but in so doing, such sand, once it accumulates, it stores water. So they find ways of abstracting water from these systems for agriculture, especially in the most dry parts in Southern Africa between Botswana, Namibia, and Zimbabwe. You see that there's a lot of even funding organizations that are funding such kind of water, should I say, water harvesting approaches to ensure that local farmers can have water available for agriculture throughout their farming season and even during the dry period.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
also from an earth observation perspective, like a section where I showed a map of active agricultural areas in South Africa, those that are rain-fed and non-rain-fed. It's also key because once we know that these areas are largely prone to drought, therefore there's like a likelihood of intervention from an irrigation perspective. But if we are to do that, we have to know how much water do we have from our aquifers on the ground and how sustainable is it. And that, with that knowledge, then we can know what kind of watering practices are we supposed to adopt to sort of ensure that farmers can continue producing their crops but using limited amount of water without compromising the quality and the quantity of the food crops that they produce.
Okay. Thank you. Kumbulani asks, it will be great to engage offline further. How can we reach out? Can we put him in touch with you, Prof?
Yes, please.
Okay,
yes, please.
Fantastic. Okay. Isaiah says, thanks for the presentation, Prof Dube. There is a lot spent by government on the clearing of invasive alien plant species. Is there a current repository to access the research and modeling your team has done on the geographic spread and proliferation of invasive alien plants? Okay.
Yes, thanks very much for the question. I think we do have some of the research outputs available at our university. What can I say? Repository. They are available online. So, and some of the reports, I think they are available with WRC. I think there is one that was recently published, so it's available. And we also have a lot of journal articles that we published in that particular space that are available, which can provide an idea on how we did it, particularly from a modeling perspective, and how Earth observation was used in that particular space, and which areas are affected. And in areas where clearing has been done, is there any regeneration that is taking place? But also from a water use perspective, how much do these use water? We have information about that. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. So Isaiah,
Pleasure.
do reach out. Thank you, Prof Dube. That was fascinating.
Pleasure.